Greetings sailors and welcome to a West Virginia 1941 replay. This isn't anything like a first look video, but I am going to give my impressions of the ship at least, although bear in mind this is after not a huge number of games played in it. There was some controversy about this, of course, when people learned the West Virginia was going to be in the game. Naturally they were hoping it would be the post-refit West Virginia, but there's a bit of an issue with that because you could either have it in alongside the Colorado at tier 7 with, well, it would have to have some heavily nerfed stats in some areas and some heavily buffed stats in others to fit in at tier 7, or else you could just have it be a straight upgrade on the Colorado and stick it in at tier 8. But then you've got the problem of who wants to play a 21 knot battleship at tier 8. I suspect that one would be quite a tough sell. So there's every chance that we might see the post-refit ship in at some point, but it's anyone's guess as to what tier it will be and what form it will take. As for this though, well, it is, as you would expect, a somewhat nerfed Colorado. The standout is, of course, that you have 16-inch guns at tier 6, and of course the only other ship that has that particular setup is the Mutsu otherwise. And I will say, I think overall this is a sturdier, overall better ship than the Mutsu. The Mutsu is still decent, but the AP shells you get to fire with these guns are essentially the Colorado's AP shells, whereas with the Mutsu I think it's different AP shells than are found on the Nagato. So the actual shells you're lobbing around are more potent. However, there are some downsides to go with that. Now, as those of you who've played the Colorado will know, it does have a couple of baked-in advantages. It has a stronger heel than other American battleships. It's not quite as good, of course, as the heel that you find on the some of the British battleships, but it's still pretty good. And it also doesn't lose as much speed when it's manoeuvring, so it makes for actually quite a manoeuvrable ship overall, despite its slow speed. West Virginia 41 doesn't have any of that. In fact, it's even got a worse turning radius than the Colorado, so it's quite a sluggish ship in comparison. In fact, it's actually a worse turn radius than both the Arizona and the New Mexico as well, which makes it, I mean, it's still alright, but it's not as good as its direct competition. It also has worse Sigma, unsurprisingly, than Colorado, although it's still, I think, 1.8, which is not bad for the tier. The guns, of course, as I've said, hit fairly hard, but whilst Colorado's guns are very nice on occasion, because of that reduced Sigma, I honestly found myself not getting a lot of luck with broadside enemy ships. There's going to be an exception you'll see in a second tier. In fact, if any of this replay seems familiar, it's because this is one of the matches I showed in my final ring video. But aside from cruisers, who are very nice and sit still for you in open water, generally speaking I found I wasn't getting the big hits very often. But where those guns did come in useful is with more angled ships that were either coming towards me or heading away from me. At which point, of course, your 16-inch guns can easily overmatch everything you meet, apart from, well, I don't say everything you meet. Some tier 8s you won't be able to overmatch, of course. But when you're top tier like this, certainly there is no armour that can really stand up to you unless it's angled belt armour, of course. So the guns definitely don't feel as reliable as the Colorado. In fact, they don't even really feel as reliable as the Arizona, which of course has got improved Sigma over the New Mex. New Mex is a bit of a shotgun, but it's still quite a good ship for its tier. So this is, it feels a bit more specialised. It's not you're not going to be blapping people for huge amounts of damage, but you are going to be able to maybe do more reliable damage over time because of your ability to overmatch. And I would say the guns certainly feel more reliable than the Mutsu because of the shells that it gets in comparison to the Mutsu. So overall, it's a fairly decent ship for its tier. It's, I mean, not surprising that it's a downgraded Colorado. In fact, actually, there's one more thing I should mention. It doesn't have the torp belt, the quite conspicuous bulge that the Colorado has on its side armour. So you've got less torp protection as well. It's like 22%. So you don't really want to take torps, and unlike the Colorado, you can't dodge out of the way of torps nearly so easily. So yeah, it's fairly solid. It's got the same fairly weak AA that the Arizona has, so although the long-range AA is the same and arguably more buffable for being tier 6 than at tier 7, it really doesn't have any of the 40 mils. In fact, it literally doesn't have any of the 40 mils or the 20 mils that the Arizona has. It's I can't even remember what the calibers are now, but anyway, they're a bit naff. It's got very little AA. It's kind of comparable to the Mutsu as well as the Arizona, so that's not really something you're going to be able to do much of with this ship. So it's fairly tough. It's fairly, you know, tanky, but if you ever get to a situation where you need to dish out a lot of damage at once, the ships that can do that at tier 6 are the ships with a lot of guns, and that's not something the West Virginia has. Of course, it's only got 8 guns. It's the bigger nature of the guns and the ability to overmatch people's armour that stand you in good stead over the longer term. But as you can see here, although I've done a decent amount of damage, I've also taken a fair bit of damage as well. And that's a problem in the Colorado, of course, but the Colorado at least gets that stronger heel, which West Virginia doesn't. So survivability skills will stand you in good stead here. Overall, though, if I was going to recommend a premium battleship, a premium US battleship at this tier, I think it would still be the Arizona. I think the Arizona is still largely a better experience than this. Although, having said that, there is one advantage this has. It has a 45-second turret traverse, which is, you know, it's not especially fast, but New Mex has, I think, 60 seconds, and I'm pretty sure Arizona gets 60 seconds as well. Yeah, it does. So the turrets are a bit more responsive, and sometimes that will come in very, very useful. But overall, I would still generally recommend Arizona for most people, just because it has more guns and it has generally better accuracy. There's not a lot left to say about this match. I've racked up a decent amount of damage, a couple of citadels on cruisers. I didn't really notice myself getting a lot of citadels on battleships, but again, what I was saying about the guns not being that reliable when you've got people showing you a broadside, that's of course when you're going to get those battleship citadels theoretically. And of course, I'm sure it will happen at some point. If I play it for long enough, I'll get to citadel somebody that's showing me a broadside. I am packing 16-inch guns after all. But it didn't happen in the time when I was testing it. I only really experienced it versus cruisers, where you can citadel them, you know, the kind of cruisers you're meeting at these tiers, at pretty much any angle that you care to hit them. Of course, it does help when they sit nice and stationary like that Omaha did. So you have to have some patience with this ship, I think. I mean, it kind of goes for the American standard battleships anyway, just given the nature of their speed. But in terms of its gunnery, you definitely have to have some patience as well. That also still goes for the Colorado, I'd say. The Colorado, you do notice how much more accurate the guns are compared to this, if you play them next to each other. But even so, the Colorado, you need a fair bit of patience with to get the guns to work. And of course, it being a slow battleship, you know, that's not going to be to everyone's taste. It's just the fact that it can easily get caught out at times and not be able to run away and of course it doesn't even have the heel that the Colorado has. That can be equally true for this, but of course it can be equally true for the New Mexico and the Arizona as well. Some people just aren't fans of the slow battleships, and I can't really blame them for that. It does at least, I'll say this, it does at least have slightly better base concealment than Colorado. It's got 16.4, but that's quite bad compared to the New Mex and the Arizona. That's another way in which the Arizona is superior. It can be made much stealthier. West Virginia is only about 300 meters better off than the Colorado is. So, yeah, it's an okay ship. Personally, if I hadn't been given it by Wargaming, I wouldn't be rushing out to buy it, especially as I already have an Arizona. And it doesn't quite have that quirky, fun factor that Mutsu can have. I'm not saying Mutsu's better necessarily, but somehow Mutsu just has a bit more character to it. Probably just because of the torpedoes. Occasionally you get to use Mutsu's torpedoes, and it can be hilarious. West Virginia 41 really doesn't have any of that, so if you're expecting something a bit different from this ship, you're probably going to be disappointed. But it's not a bad ship. It's not a bad ship at all. It really will be interesting to see if Wargaming does do post-refit 1 at some point. We can have a fun game maybe in the comments of, you know, quite the buffs it would need to get away with having 21 knots at tier 8. I mean, if nothing else, it would have to have a British super heel, right? And I don't even know what else they would have to do to it. Better armour, better AA. I don't know, just trying to make it so it isn't a horrible experience and survivable enough to cope with having a 21 knot speed. It would have to be quite OP in some regards, because 21 knots at tier 8 would be a serious liability. Anyway, so enough speculation, let's wrap the video up. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.